Okay, so we are recording now. Do a screen share. Okay, so all right. So today, what we're going to cover is we're going to cover HTTP, and we're going to connect our client to a server. So the way this usually works is when you go to a domain like google.com, your browser is going to send out a request over the internet, and it's going to get back some HTML, some CSS, some JavaScript, and then it's going to build out your web page. But then, as you want to get more data, what you can do is your browser can make an HTTP request back to a specific server somewhere, and then it can retrieve some information. So, for example, on Facebook, if you have there's the infinite scroll in your feed. So as you keep scrolling down, it's going to keep making HTTP requests, and it's going to go out and grab more feed data for you. It's not going to refresh the page. It's just grabbing more data and populating your feed. So if we, I should have had a more simple. Some of these are pretty complex. Essentially, what's going on is, well, let's do. Essentially, what's happening, if I do a little annotation here, is you have this is your browser, and so it's going to make a request to a server that's living somewhere, get some information. The server is going to send that information back to your computer. So, and it's going to keep going back and forth, and you can send these messages back and forth from the client to the server. These are one-way communications. The server is not going to be sending stuff to the browser unless they ask for it. But the server is just going to be listening, and it's in this constant state of listening, and it's waiting to receive a request from the client, and then it will send back some data. So I have built a server for you guys. And so what you're going to do is you're going to call down you're going to clone down the code, and then what you're doing is this is what the server looks like. And actually, I'm going to remove some of I had some logging statements in here. Okay. So, all right, so we have a folder, and then this is what you're going to clone down. So it's going to have node modules, package.json, and server.js, and then you're just going to go node, server.js, and then now the server is listening on port 5000. And so that's the port that you're going to make your HTTP requests to from the browser. So both your application server, so your client side, like your React server, that's going to be running locally. This is kind of like, you could think of this as the server out on the internet that is sending you back your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then this other server, this is a different server in a different location that just holds all your data. It's like how you're getting access to the database of data. And so what you'll do is initially you go to the localhost 3000, that serves up your client-side application, and then as you work on your client-side application, it's going to make requests back to this this server, the one that's on the port 5000, and that's where it's going to retrieve data from. So it's a very common setup to where you go to a domain, there's a specific server that's meant to handle sending HTML, CSS, JavaScript down to all the different browsers, and then there's a separate server that handles all of the HTTP requests that go back and forth, requesting and sending data. So we're going to walk through an example. So if we, actually I had some example code, I'm going to move this over there. All right, and here's our to-do list stuff I'm going to close out. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to do create React app. We're going to go friends list. Okay, so create our React app, just that basic template, and then we're going to install a couple different packages. So we'll be installing Redux, React Redux, just like what you're used to, and then we're going to be installing 2 additional packages on top of that. One will be called Redux Promise, and then the other one is called Axios. Axios is how you make HTTP requests. Redux Promise is how you set up a it's a Redux middleware, and so we're going to go over what middlewares are in Redux in just a little bit. So, all right. Okay, so here's our application. So we have friends list right here. I'm going to open this up in Atom. Okay, so there's our friends list right there. Okay, so now inside of our, well, let's go to our app.js. Let's clear all this out. Okay, and then now, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to be working through setting up a basic Redux application. So this first part should be kind of a review. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install the stuff we need. So we're going to go npmi -save. We're going to go Redux and React Redux. Okay. All right, so we're going to create a new file. I'm going to go reducers/index.js. All right, and then new file, we're going to go actions/index.js. Okay, so reducers, actions, okay. So then on reducers, we're going to have another file. We're going to call this friendslist.js. So we have our friends list reducer. We're going to start with our reducers so we kind of figure out, how we want our, application to look. And so we're going to go export default, and then this is going to be state, which will start out as an empty array, and then action. And then I'm just going to set this up as a switch statement right from the start. So I'm going to go switch action.type, and then case, well, I'll just put default right now. Okay, so that's just going to return the state initially. All right, so now that just sets up our reducer. Essentially, it's going to just create an empty array because we don't have any other cases that we're checking for. So now in index.js, we're going to bring this all together. So import, combine, reducers from Redux, and then import friends reducer from friends. And then we're going to go const root reducer is equal to combine reducers. We pass it an object. There's a friends, and this will be the friends reducer. Okay. Export default root reducer. Okay, so this just sets up our, the root. It's our state. We're setting up our reducers. This is all plugged in, ready to go right now. Just kind of like for our base, base template. So now let's go into our index.js file. So what we're going to do is import provider from React Redux, and then we're going to go import create store from Redux. All right, and then import reducers from reducers. Okay, so we have provider, create store, and reducers. And so then we come in and we go provider, we nest app inside of it. Okay, and then we're going to go store is equal to create store reducers, like that. Okay, so that's now going to properly create our store on our object. And so then now inside of app.js, we're going to go friends list. So I'm going to create a component, import friends list from friends list, and then now we're gonna go new file. I'll create our ES6 component, and then in here we're gonna go import React component from React, and then class friends list extends component, and then render, and then inside of here we're going to return. I'm going to go div. Alright, we have our unordered list. Inside of here we're going to go this.props.map, or this.props.friends.map, because friends is what the property is on the state, and we're going to map that in. So we're going to go friend, and then we're going to go li friend.name, just like that. All right, so we're just returning the li. We're just making it very simple right now, and then key. Well, I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay, so friend.name. So this is just going to iterate over, map all of that out. So now we gotta now to connect it with our state, we gotta go import connect from React Redux. All right, so this will allow us to connect our component. So we're going to go export default connect, and we're going to create a mapped state to props function, and we're going to pass in friends list like that. So now I got to make our map state to props function, const map state to props. And so this is going to take in the state, and we're going to return an object. And inside of here, we're going to go friends, and this will be state.friends. Okay, so that's going to handle all of our mappings. This should map all the data through. This is our container component. Again, this like map state to props, and then like this part, and importing connect. You're just going to have to get used to that. It's going to be almost exactly the same every single time you do it, so it will come with time. It will come with practice. But going kind of quick through this so we can just get into the new material. All right, so now let's go run npm start. Something is already running. Oh. This is what we're going to be building. Okay. All right. Module not found. Friends in. Okay, so error in source producers index.js. So in index.js, it's not finding friends. So let's go index. So I'm looking for friends. The file is called friends list. Okay. So friends reducers from friends list. Okay. So okay. Export default state. Okay. So I did that thing again where I don't write the functions right. That is in friends list. And there we go. All right. So now I'm going to throw a dummy object in here just to see if it pops out. And there we go. Ben pops out. There's just that warning about the key thing. So let's go back into app.js, and then on friends list, we're going to go key, and then we're going to pass in I. So that gets rid of that key error. Okay, great. So there, now we have that first name printed out. And then what we're going to do here is inside of app.js, I'm going to go print h1 like that. So there, my friends, there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is on our server, there's a list of friends that we're going to get. And so what we're going to do is instead of us getting this friends list from anything that we have to type in here or write in here, we're actually going to retrieve a list of friends from the server. So on our server that's running. So on port 3000 we have our React server, and then on port 5000 we have our backend server. So this is our RESTful API, and then on the API there are two routes on it. And this will be in the README. But if we look on here, we have two routes. We have /friends that's defined in here, and this is all Node and Express code, and you guys will learn how to do this later. And then we have a new friend. And so there's different types of HTTP requests we can make. The two really common ones are get and post. And so we're going to make a get request to /friends, and that's going to give us back a list of friends that we can show. And then we have a post request that we'll make to new friend that will add the friend that we send into the friends array on the server. So there's no database. None of this is being saved to your computer. So if you get the server into a weird state, you can just restart the server and it will go back to how it was. So let's all right, so let's quit out of that. All right, so our server's going. So let's now, all right, so now we need to get our friends from the server. So if we, actually I'm gonna pull up, there's the diagram. So actually I'm gonna pull up the diagram that Ty had shown us. So, all right, so here we have, so you have actions. So you have actions that get dispatched to reducers. The reducers modify the store, and then the smart components get re-rendered. Smart components pass data to dump props. Okay, so now how do we make these HTTP requests? Well, so what's going to happen is inside of our actions, we're going to make the request, and then we're going to install some middleware that's going to go right here in between actions and reducers. And so what the middleware does, they're functions that they take in the action and then they can do some processing on it. So it's like this little tube. It's the action comes in one end and it can do some work on it and then it will spit it out the other end. We could have a whole bunch of different middleware all linked together and they're all doing different things to the actions. And so then our action is going to pass through all these middlewares on its way to the reducer. And in fact, that's our reducer. So the action is going to pass through all these different middleware functions on its way to the reducer. And so we could have no middlewares or we could have 100 middleware functions. And it just means that the action will pass through each one. The actions can modify, or the middleware can modify the actions. It can destroy the action, so it can stop the action from firing. So maybe there's special cases where you want to stop an action from being sent to all the reducers. Yeah, and so what we're going to do is we're actually going to so with Axios, it's going to return an object that's called a promise, and that promise is going to be passed into a middleware, and then the middleware is going to handle that promise, wait for it to be fulfilled, and then it's going to return the corresponding data. So I just spoke to you like that was a lot of information that I just dumped on you. So let me explain in more detail. So let me actually see if there's a promise diagram. So the middleware is, you can have it check for an action type, and and so it's essentially just it's just a function, and so it's kind of like the reducer, but whatever it returns is what gets fed into the reducers. So it's like a middle step in between the actions and the reducers. So real quick, we need to go over what a promise is. So I just realized that we have not covered that. So if we had a function called make API request, like that, and we don't need to know about what it does in there, but if we call our make API request function, this is going to send a request to a server, and it's going to get some information and bring it back. An important thing to know is that if we're making an API request, that request could fail. It could potentially never come back. It could also it could take a long time for that information to come back. It could fail. It could never come back. Maybe it's really fast, but it still takes a bit of time. So JavaScript is asynchronous. So you remember how with set timeout, when you run it, if you pass in a function in here like that, and if I did console.log2 like this, so let me run those. So if we run this code, you'll see that 2 prints out and then 1 prints out after it. So 2 and then a 1. And so what happens is this function became asynchronous. And so it's taken out of the normal flow of the code because we don't want the entire application to freeze up and wait for the set timeout to finish. We want everything else to run normally, and then we're just going to come back here once that time has passed. So 2, because we just keep going along and doing our thing. But it takes it out of its normal flow. So we see 0 prints out, 2 prints out immediately, and then we come back to the 1 1,000 milliseconds later. So that's pretty, you guys have seen that, you've seen set interval. It's the same idea with an HTTP request. So if we're going to make an API request with a library, so with Axios, and you don't need to worry about how it does it behind the scenes, but when we make an API request, it's done asynchronously. And so we're going to make it, and then our code is going to run normally afterwards. So our code's just going to keep going along. And then when our response comes back, then we're going to jump back to this line and then fulfill run the callback function. So so it's that idea that it's a synchronous JavaScript. And so AJAX means asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So asynchronous JavaScript and XML and AJAX request, it's inside of our code. We're going to make the HTTP request to the server, but then in the meantime, the rest of our code is just going to keep running. And then when that request comes back from the server, then we'll jump back to that point in time where the request was made, and then there's a function there that we're going to invoke, and that function will handle the response from the AJAX server. So at a high level, again, it's maybe I can annotate this. So so we have our block of code. Well, that's all right. So this is some code. It's going to make a request to the server, but then our computer is going to keep running all the functions in the code after it. And then when the request comes back, the process that's been going down like this is now going to cycle up, and it's going to hit this function again, which there will be a second callback function that's waiting. And so we're going to jump back up to here, and then when that's done, we jump back down to where we were. Just like running along. So if these are different functions, if these rectangles are different functions, and we're flowing from one to the next, then what happens is, this function is, it's set aside, and then we reinvoke. It's, we go back and process that information when it returns. It's just the idea that our code does not stop and freeze when we're making HTTP request. It keeps flowing, and then we come back up here once the request comes back from the server. How do you guys feel about that? Just that high level idea. How about this? Direct. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. So here's what a promise is. Yeah. So this is going to come right now. So that's just the general AJAX workflow. So now what a promise is, and so what we'll do is we'll go const promise is equal to make API request. And so this promise is an object. And then that promise has a .then method on it, response, and then in here we can process the response. And we'll get into this in just a moment with our actual code. We'll see the how we actually handle the response. But this is kind of the general workflow. Is that with a promise, it's that when we make an asynchronous function, it instantly returns this promise object. And then on the promise object, it has a .then method. And then to the .then method, we can pass in a callback function. And so this callback function is what will run once the request comes back. So our make API request will instantly return a promise object. The promise object has a .then, and then we pass it a callback function. And then so this all happens instantly. But then maybe 1,000 milliseconds later, our request comes back. And so then this callback function that I have highlighted will be run. So this will happen about 1,000 milliseconds later. And then, but in the meantime, all this other code has been, going on down here. Like everything's been running, and then it will jump back up and it will run this callback function. This is that function that's going to be run once the data makes its way back to the server, or makes it back to the browser. Yep, yeah, exactly. And so it's this this callback function. It's waiting to receive the response from the server. So when that response comes back, then this callback function will execute and process that data. So this is, again, is high level. It's just the idea that we make the request, it's asynchronous, but in the meantime, we have a promise that's it's kind of like a placeholder for the future value that's going to come back. And so then promise has a .then, and then this callback function is invoked once the request comes back, and then response is how we can handle the data that came back from the server. So now let's write some code, and I think that will. So this is kind of the. Yeah, so you can have a .then, and then you can test to see if it's an error. But yeah, you can also check to see if it's like. The syntax is different with different from time to time, but essentially, yeah, you can go promise error is a common one, and so it says like if there was an error and like nothing came back or something like that, then promise error would handle the error, and then you would have a promise success that would handle the response. So. So if this right here, this make API request, if it returns back an error, then it will call this function. If it returns back a successful response, then it will call this function. So yeah, so you can have and so you would want error handling built in to where you would so you would want error handling built in, so that way your application can gracefully handle a failed request, because maybe the server botched it. Maybe there's a bug on the server, or maybe the server went down for some reason. So so you want to be able to gracefully handle server errors. So so that's kind of the general idea of a promise, and we call this fulfilling a promise. So we fulfill when the data comes back, the promise is fulfilled, the callback function is run, and then we can process the response from the server. Okay, so that's very high level. What we're doing. And so now let's jump in. So as I mentioned, middleware. There's a middleware that we're going to use that resolves promises. So from our action, and let me. So if this right here is our action. Okay, so here's our action. And it's going to go through to the middleware. Oh, man. All right. So there's our middleware. So the action is going into the middleware, and then it's going into the reducer. Okay. So what we're doing is we're going to install a middleware that handles promises. So the action is going to make an HTTP request, and then it's going to send a promise to the middleware. But then the middleware is going to pass the actual data, or the response, the fulfilled promise, to the reducer. So it means that the reducer isn't going to get the data until the promise has finished, or the HTTP request is finished. So that's what the middleware is going to do. So we're going to add in a middleware that will process the promise, and then yeah, and then we're going to set up our actions to actually make the GET request. So the actions and making the GET request, that part's pretty easy. Middleware, that's conceptually a little tricky. And to add the middleware, we're going to have to do some stuff up in this file. Okay. All right. I'll be back in 1 second. Okay. So, all right. So the way that we're going to change this file and the way that it will be different is that we're going to do, we have to import another function in here from Redux. And so we're going to create store, and we're going to go apply middleware. Okay, middleware, like that. So apply middleware is another function that we're going to bring in. And then up here, we're going to go const create store with middleware. We're going to set that equal to apply middleware. And then this is where we pass in the different middleware functions right there. And then here we're going to pass in create store. And so then down in here, instead of create store, we're going to go create store with middleware. So it's just, it allows us to place the middleware into our function, and so they'll be, or into our application, and they'll be placed in between the actions and the reducers. So the middleware that we're going to use is called Redux Promise, and so now we need to go in and install that. So let's go, all right, so I'm going to go npmi-save, Redux Promise, and I'm also going to do Axios. That's the library we're going to use to make the HTTP requests. So we're going to install those. Great, okay. So yeah, so it's it's just with Node and JavaScript, so it's just doing the same thing. So yeah, it's it's pretty much the same thing. So now let's install our Redux Promise. Let's go import Redux Promise from Redux Promise. And so again, there's just a middleware that handles promises, and we just stick this in there, and then that's all we have to worry about. We don't have to worry about promises anymore. This is going to fulfill the promises and return the result of them into our reducers. And so it just it simplifies the asynchronous workflow. So there, we got that now. Okay, so now this file is all set. Yep, okay. So then now the next change is inside of actions. So what we're going to do is inside of our actions file. Well, okay, so friends, actually I'm gonna add in a case here inside of our friends.js. So let's do well, okay, I'm gonna define it on the action first. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're going to import Axios from Axios, and then we're going to go export, and then we're going to go const. I'm going to call this fetch data. So that's the name of our action creator, and then inside of here we're going to return an object that will have a type, and then it's also going to have a payload. All right, so what we need to do is for the payload is going to be a promise. We're going to pass in a promise. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go const request promise is equal to Axios. So right up here, we go .get. So again, get means we're sending a request to the server saying, give us the information at this address. A post request is when we're saving. We're going to send some data along with it. So we're going to go get, and then I'm going to go http:// localhost, and then I'm going to go 5000/friends. And so that's a route that I made on the node server. And so we're going to make a GET request to the node server at the /friends route. And this is going to give us back, initially it's a promise, but when the promise is fulfilled, it will give us back an array of friend objects. And so our payload is going to be this request promise. I can even just go promise. I'll just call it promise. So it's going to return a promise. We're going to pass the promise in, but then our readx promise middleware is going to wait for the promise to be fulfilled. And once it's fulfilled, then it will pass our data on to the reducers. Okay, so then for the type, we're going to call this fetch data, but we're doing something a little bit different now. We're going to go export const fetch data is equal to fetch data like that. So then down in here, we can go fetch data as a variable, and it makes it so that way in case there's a typo or something, it makes it so it's exactly the same everywhere, because if we just have this string fetch data that we're writing everywhere, it's easier to have an error. So it's not changing the behavior, it's just we're abstracting it out. So now inside of our friends list up in here, we're going to go import fetch data from actions like that. So that gives us fetch data. So now in here we go case fetch data. I'm putting spaces there. Okay, so case fetch data, and so then in here we're going to go return action.payload.data. So data, because payload when the object when the promise is fulfilled, it will be an object that will have a bunch of data or information about the request, like headers and stuff like that, and the status that the server returned. And so we want to get the data property, and I'll log this out so we can see it, but we'll do console.log action.payload. So we'll run that. All right, so fetch data, just get a run. All right, so now what we'll do is inside of, okay, so then index.js and everything, that's all fine. Okay, so, all right, so down here we have our promise that we've created using Axios.get to that route, and then we're returning this, and then again that's going to be fed through the middleware and then into the reducers. Okay, so now we need to invoke this from inside of our React component. So if we go to friends list, so now what we need to do is we need to import fetch data from action. So we're importing our action function, and then we're going to import bind action creators from Redux. Okay, so that will allow us to bind in our fetch data into bind action creators. Okay, so then now we have below map state to props, we're going to create our map dispatch to props. All right, so then inside of here, we're going to return bind action creators, pass in an object, and then we're going to go, I'll call this get friends, and that's our fetch data function. So we're going to reference it by this.props.getFriends. And then we pass in map dispatch to props down in here. Okay, so now up in our function, we now have access to this this method, or that fetch data method. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a button right here. And the button, I'm going to say get friends. And then we're going to go on click. And then we're going to pass in actually we don't even need to do that. We're just going to go this.props.getFriends. So we put in our this.props.getFriends. So getFriends comes from here. And so fetch data, so again, this is that whole thing of taking our action creator, and then we map it in here. This is where it gets connected, so that way it will feed through the middleware and then into the reducers. And then it also makes it so we can access it on our React component, which is right here. So this stuff is almost like it's separate from the React component. So the stuff down there, it's almost like that's separate from the React component. And so it's like, this is the React stuff, and then this is the stuff that combines React and Redux together. Okay. Yeah. That's something that you must have done. And so I don't think it's in here by default. That's good. And so I want to get everyone working on that, on the linter again, on the same thing. So yeah. Oh, yep, exactly. Good. So yeah, no, the linter is, yeah, the linter helps a lot and forces some good habits. So I'm going to yeah, I'm going to make sure that that's getting included for everyone. But okay, so right now we got this all saved. And sorry, I'm going kind of fast just because I'm trying to make this video a little like succinct, and then trying to get in so we can see this working example, and then yeah, that way you guys after dinner can start working on the project. So as I have my friends, now I'm going to click get friends, and oh, dispatch is not a function, so I probably did not pass it in down in here. Yep. Great. So now let's come back into here, refresh, and then get friends, and Ben, Austin, Ryan, Michelle. Okay, so Ben, Austin, Ryan were all the ones that work in Lambda School, and then I just made up another name. So, all right, so prints out a list of people. So great, so all of our stuff comes back. This is being logged from the reducer. So if you remember, this is the payload, the action.payload. So there's this config on it, there's these headers, request. You can ignore all that stuff. And then data is, these are the actual, the data is the actual, that's the data that we want to get back from the server. So you can ignore all the other stuff on here, the config, the headers, the request. Yeah, so data is what you want. So there, okay, so now we got that back. And so now what we need to do is let's add a post request. All right, so let's sorry, let's switch train of thought. Okay, so in here now we're gonna do a new function, and so we're gonna go add friend. All right, so add friend is going to take in a name property. And then instead of Axios.get, we're going to change it to post. Instead of friends, it's new friend, and then it takes in a second argument. A post request takes in a second argument, and it's an object. And so we're just going to pass in an object with a name property on it with a name value. So, yep. So we're going to make the post request to that route, pass it the name object. That returns a promise again that we pass it in. And so now we need to create a new type. Export const, and this is going to be new friend, like that. So change this to new friend. There. Okay, so there's our type, and it's just going to pass the promise along. It takes in a name, and then now it's set it up on friends list. So in here, we have fetch data, and then new friend. And then we're going to go case new friend. And we're going to go return. And again, this is going to be action.payload.data, because that route as well is going to return. It's going to return a list of the current friends. Or actually, well, let's just go. We'll just go to state. We'll just return state. So because we're adding the new friend, but we're just going to just going to return the existing state. Well, no, okay, so we'll do, never mind. I was going to change the homework. The way it's currently structured is that you get back the new data. So this will be the new friends list that has the new friend added to it. Okay, so now our friends list reducer is set up. Our action creator, or add friend action creator, is properly set up, and so now we need to set it up inside of the friends list.js component. So what we're going to do here, below that button, I'm just going to go put a div, and I'm going to put in an input, and then we're going to have a button. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah, eventually you'll have a file that will just be action types. Yeah. So I mean, because if you had 50 types in there, eventually you'd break that out into its own file. Yeah. So good question. That's good that you're thinking ahead like that. Yeah. So eventually you would want to have your own file that has them all in it. Okay. So I have input, and we're going to go on change. And then we have our value. And then this is going to be on click. Okay, so those are the different properties. And so now we need to do create our constructor with props, and then super props. And then in here we're going to go this dot state. And so this is, again, is very similar to what you guys were just working on. And so this dot state is going to be our new friend name, and we're going to set it equal to just an empty string. And so down in here, value is going to be this dot state dot new friend name, and then on change we're going to go this dot update new friend name. And so we're going to make a method here that's going to go update new friend name, and then we're going to go this dot set state, and then new friend name is going to be equal to event. This will be event dot target dot value. Okay, so that's how we're going to pass that in. I will update the state. So we're going to go this dot update new friend name is equal to this dot update new friend name dot bind this. So we add into this context, so we can use the this keyword inside of that method. So this is perhaps update new friend name. Okay, and so that's all fine. So now what we need to do is, so this will properly update the state as we change the input, and then now we need to add in the ability to submit that new field as an HTTP request to the server. So we need to bring in we need to bring in that other method from our action creator file. So add friend is what we're calling it. So again, we're going to go add friend to import it there. We'll come down in here. We're going to go add friend. Okay, so we just added in like that. So then on click here, we're going to go this dot props dot add friend, and then we're going to pass in this dot state dot new friend name, like that. So the whatever new friend name is at that point in time, we're going to pass that to add friend when they click. Okay, so let's go ahead and save, or resave it. Come in here, we'll get our friends. Okay, and now let's add Ty. There's Ty. There's Christine. All right. So what happened, and you can see here, here's the response we get back. And so the data, it just it returned back an array with all the new values in it. We give back a status that said 200, so that means that everything went fine. The server received the request, it processed it properly, and just did everything according to what we'd expect. And so yeah, it prints it all out. There. So that is Axios. That is like promises, HTTP requests. It's the idea that our data is now coming from the server. And so you're going to be doing a lot of this. This is where your data is going to come from in the applications that you build. You're going to be requesting data, getting data from the server, and then so that your actions will make the HTTP request, they'll return their promises, your middleware will process the promise, and then once the promise has fulfilled, then that data is fed through the reducers. The reducers then look at that data and then modify the state appropriately. the state is modified. That sends a signal out to your containers. Friendsless is a container because we use this connect thing, and so then it will re-render because the state values that it has injected into it, the friends list, has changed. And so this will detect that that prop has changed, and then this React component will re-render. So it will persist. So if I refresh and do get friends, it's all still there. It will persist as long as the server is up. And so the server, if I kill the server and start it up again, and then now I do get friends, it's actually going to just be the 4. Yeah. So because the server has an array that it's filling up with things, but then that's not being saved onto your disk. It's not being saved into a database. That's what databases do. So a database allows your stuff to persist if the server goes down. And so, yeah, so this will persist like while you're just like working on it in between refreshes. But if you get it into a weird state, like you've pushed some weird data up or something, then you can just restart your server and then you're back to square one. So yeah, this is, yeah, so it's, yeah, so now we're, yeah, getting our data, rendering it, hopefully that, as you work through this, this will deepen your understanding and, strengthen your understanding of, just the basic Redux principles, and as we build onto this and build more complex client-side Redux applications, the basics will sink in. Okay. How are you guys feeling about this? Yes, it is recorded. So, um, yeah, obviously it's kind of a fire hose, pretty high level, but now you have the recording. You can reach out to me for questions, and then it's the real learning is going to come when you work through the project and start to get in and fiddle around with it and start building things. So all right, so we had about an hour. So this was about an hour that we went over this stuff. So your video should be a little more succinct. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions, and then obviously I'll jump in and help you guys out with this. We are. I mean, we'll see how it goes. See how much progress you guys make. I am going to be unavailable for quick responses tomorrow, but anyway, just depending on how this goes, we may extend this project out to 4 days as well. All right. Okay. Well, have a great dinner, and then I'll have your project posted by the end of dinner, and then yeah, have at it, and let me know what questions you have. Oh, you're good. You're good. All right.